Hi, I'm Liza. Today we will talk about the transport to visitor attractions based on the book Managing Transport Attractions. Now, this chapter outlines the different topics of the relative importance of tourism to overall transport volumes, followed by the modal share of trips to the visitor attractions, which will embody the dominance of car in the domestic market, the different factors influencing the modal share of visitor attractions, and the reasons for car dominance. Next will be the environmental impacts of tourism transport, followed by the different government policies, and then on to the visitor attraction initiatives, which will also embody the combined tickets, the special bus services, the parking of the visitor attraction, and then next will be the integrated policies for attractions, and then on to the conclusion. The aims of this chapter is number one, investigate the relationship between transport and tourism. Two is investigate travel to visitor attractions. And then on to analyze the current patterns of demands and analyze the impact of tourism transport. And then lastly is to identify the policies for sustainable transport and then evaluate their limitations. The most important role of transport in the tourism industry is to provide an easier access for visitors to reach their destinations. If visitor attractions cannot provide that access, then they will fail to meet their financial objectives. And this could in return result to a decline in their profit, tourist demand, or even the possibility of closures. Transport services are prerequisite for the viability and prosperity of visitor attractions. The journey itself contributes to the overall experience of a tourist, and it will only just lead to two possible scenarios, which is a positive experience for the transport or a negative one. So this chapter will generally demonstrate the dominant mode of transport to visitor attraction that varies according to many factors such as the location, the size, the time, and the visitor profile of the attraction. So I will now give you to Mr. Vanayan as he will discuss our first topic.
Hi, I'm Romar. We will be talking about the transport and the visitor attraction. We are going to start with the market research of how visitors travel to a visitor attraction that is essential to its good management for a variety of reasons. In the first instance, the manager of the attraction need to be able to operate the site effectively and accommodating visitors' transport demands. That is essential of the component of this one. So in this chapter, it will investigate more detail the majority of small and medium-sized visitor attraction outside the central areas of major cities are dominated by domestic visitors arriving by car. Next is the attraction needs to provide sufficient car parking spaces to accommodate them. So ideally, managers need to know the share of total visitors arriving by car, average car occupancy, length of visit and peak periods of arrival and departure. This information will enable them to meet peak demand for parking and avoid turning paying customers away. Last one about this topic is the transport considerations that can also significantly influence the future expansion and development of the visitor attraction. So in the UK, significant developments of the attraction such as new buildings or additional facilities will require planning permission under the provisions of the Town and County Planning Act of 1990, and one of the most common grounds for refusal is road access. An inability of the road network to accommodate the additional traffic generated or to provide sufficient parking are grounds for objections to the refusal of permission. So for our next topic is about the relative importance of tourism travel to overall transport volume. So the National Travel Survey or the NTS shows that leisure and travel accounts for 31% of all trips and 40% of all kilometers traveled in the UK. However, this average trip length of leisure trips is mere 11.6 kilometers, demonstrating that many leisure trips are local journeys. A more appropriate measure of domestic tourism is holiday trips that would average a length of 71.1 kilometers and the day visits of 23 kilometers, and these combined account for 12.5% of all UK passenger kilometers but only 3.7% of all trips. So this share has remained virtually unchanged since 1985 to 1986, indicating the growth of tourism traffic is in line with road traffic growth for other journey purposes. Leisure day trips have shown a downward trend since 1998. This is an interesting and somewhat unexpected finding, as improvements to the road network are acknowledged to have induced traffic growth. And lastly, there has been a fall in domestic tourism trips by car, and this is demonstrated in Germany, where both the number of trips and distances traveled have declined. There is no comprehensive measure of the number of trips or distances traveled to visitor attraction, although they account for 7% of trips in the leisure visit survey.
Hi, my name is Rolf, and I will be talking about the modal share of trips to visitor attractions. The first topic that we will dive in is the dominance of the car in the domestic market. The vehicle car dominates UK's domestic tourism travel, accounting for around 71% of all trips to and from holiday destinations. As shown in Table 7.1, the England Leisure Visit Survey of 2005 shows that 68% of all leisure day trips lasting over 3 hours were taken by car. However, the modal share for individual attractions will vary considerably depending on the range of factors. And later, we will be tackling about the reasons why the car has a huge market share in the UK. Moving on, here are the factors influencing the modal share of visitor attractions. The first factor that we have is the location of the attraction. The most significant influence on the modal choice of transport is the location. The impact of location on travel behavior is perhaps initially best demonstrated by an unrelated set of transport statistics. Car ownership in the UK has risen to 26.21 million cars in 2005. Although 25% of UK households consisting of the 19% of the population do not have access to a car. Table 7.2 shows the impact of location on car ownership. In rural areas where public transport is the poorest, only 11% of households do not have access. However, this rises in urban areas, reaching its peak in London, which has the most comprehensive public transport network. The second factor that we have is the profile of visitors. Data from International Passenger Survey reveals that only 6.7% of overseas visitors to the UK arrived by private car in 2005. Even allowing for cars for hire by a minority of overseas visitors, still the vast majority of trips by this particular market to the UK uses some form of public transport. As shown in Table 7.3, overseas visitors also impact on modal split of tourist arrivals in historic towns, contributing to the high bus shares. Clearly, there are destinations outside major world cities with good public transport infrastructures, which is customary for overseas visitors to hire cars. The last factor we have is the size of the attraction. Public transport market share is highest for those visitor attractions in large cities, where overseas visitors form a high percentage of the market. However, it is low for rural tourist destinations with a relatively small resident population, which are dominated by the domestic market and with a higher percentage of visits made by staying visitors. And here are the reasons for the car dominance in the UK. First, the car offers huge advantages over public transport for the visitor. While the cost of acquiring a car can be high, approximately 60% of motoring costs are fixed annual charges. Next, the car is an ideal unit for groups of 4 to 5 people, as there is no incremental increase in the cost of travel for each person until the vehicle is at full capacity. Third, the car also offers greater flexibility than public transport. It does not operate to fixed routes and fixed timetables, and it is widely acceptable that the growth of car ownership and car use has brought huge advantages in individual mobility.
Hi, I'm Sophia. We will be talking about the environmental impacts of tourism transport. The objective is to be more aware of the negative effects of numerous tourism activities and what we can do to minimize them. Traveling is now made easier and cheaper through various transport innovations, only that it only has a catch of producing harmful effects to our environment. We will now identify the environmental impacts of tourism transport, and first on the list is energy consumption. According to the World Tourism Organization, it results in carbon dioxide emission and tourism's contribution to global warming. Three-quarters of CO2 emissions from tourism are transport related. Emissions from transporting tourists have grown steadily over the past decades, reaching almost 1,600 million tons of CO2 in 2016, amounting to 5% of all energy related to CO2 emissions. Second is noise pollution. An article by Lion Land states that tourist destinations are often subject to significant noise. Tourist vehicles entering and leaving natural areas create a lot of noise. Such noise is the source of distress for wildlife. Loud music played by tourists in forested areas also disturbs the animals living in the area. Third is visual intrusion. A published book by UKSagePub.com highlights that environmental pollution is as much aesthetic as physical. An area of scenic beauty attracts greater number of tourists, so more and more of the natural landscape is lost to development. The countryside retreating because of the growth in hotels and other amenities that spring up to cater for tourist needs. The eventual result is that the site is no longer seen as scenic, and the tourists move on to somewhere more tranquil and as well as beautiful. Similarly, without careful control, stately homes that try to meet the needs of visitors provide an ever expanding range of facilities, such as larger car parks, cafes, shops, directional signposts, and toilet facilities. Also, airports, terminals, and all of which that detract from the appeal of the main attraction. And lastly, waste and encouragement. An article by Jennifer McDowell says that waste can potentially overload waste management systems, especially in destinations that are more rural in nature or have a low population. Overloading, as well as tourist lack of familiarity with differing waste systems, can lead to improper waste disposal, which can in turn lead into environmental problems such as groundwater or soil contamination and greenhouse gas emissions, among others. Littering is also a particularly problematic issue in tourist areas, especially those on the coast, and can have extremely damaging effects on both the local landscape and marine environment. A study by environmental consultancy Eunomia Research and Consulting earlier this year revealed that 80% of the 12.2 million tons of plastic entering the sea every year comes from land-based sources, with litter like drinks, bottles, and other packaging being the largest contributor. As there is also a growing body of literature which confirms that transport is a dominant contributor to visitor attraction environmental impacts, this reaches a conclusion that to achieve growth within a framework of sustainable development, the transport to and from attractions must be central policy focus. However, for appropriate policies to be developed, targets must be set and their likely impact considered. More importantly, is to focus on establishing a more sustainable platform for tourism industry to be able to preserve and protect our environment and natural resources. For the next topic, we'll be talking about the government policy interventions made to achieve a more sustainable, resilient, and effective tourism industry. We will also be able to assess if these policies are indeed helpful to the environment, the tourist, and the industry itself. The UK government has acknowledged the need to develop a more sustainable and less car dependent transport policy. Although progress to date has been slow, the strategy of UK tourism industry is outlined in Tomorrow's Tourism and sets an ambitious target to exceed the rate of global growth in the industry by the end of 2010. The follow-up document, Tomorrow's Tourism Today, quantifies this as a 100 billion industry by 2010, which represents a growth rate of around 4% per annum. However, as already outlined in this chapter, elements of the industry are actually beginning to stagnate. Whilst the policy document advocates a wise growth strategy for tourism, one which integrates the economic, social, and environmental implications of tourism, it is less specific on how environmentally sensitive growth can be achieved. Complex journeys to tourist attractions that require an interchange between modes of transport are difficult to plan and can form a barrier in making these journeys by public transport. In 1999, the English Tourism Council, or ETC, since replaced by Visit Britain, produced a video that used a number of scenarios to demonstrate the difficulties of finding out the details of local transport services, like routes and departure times, in advance of a journey in an unfamiliar location. A national integrated transport information service available online at www.transportdirect since December 2004 has addressed this. However, its effect on modal choice is difficult to determine on current evidence. The third measure, aimed directly at visitor attractions, is the development of green transport plans to achieve a switch away from car use. Examples of such approaches are developed in the following section. Tomorrow's tourism proposals for integrating policy. First is improve the quality and accessibility of information available to tourists by developing a national integrated public transport information service by 2000. Examine the potential for delivering integrated public transport and tourist information in a user-friendly way, including electronic means. Third, encourage tourist destination and leisure site managers to produce green transport plans to reduce congestion and pollution from employee and visitor car traffic. Next, encourage the upgrading of public transport infrastructure, such as facilities for bicycle carriage. Identify and publicize schemes which utilize transport of visitor management techniques to good effect. Lastly, encourage the creation of new tourism products which integrate walking with cycling or travel by bus and rail as part of the experience. Nevertheless, this rather simplistic approach does beg a number of questions. So first, is a significant modal switch away from the car realistic, particularly for longer distance stay visits, given all the advantages of the car in terms of cost and flexibility outlined earlier? Second, what are the objectives of this modal switch? Tomorrow's tourism sets no target. It simply presumes that a switch from car to public transport is desirable. Is the aim to reduce greenhouse gas or GHG emissions? If so, policies need to be directed at a trip from home to the destination area. For day trips, the visitor attraction can develop offers and policies to encourage arrivals by alternatives to the car. But for staying visitors, initiatives have to be coordinated at a destination level. There has to be a common approach between attractions and other stakeholders, such as accommodation providers, to discourage staying visitor arrivals by car. This approach has been pioneered by the Swiss Association, or GAST, which encompasses 9 virtually car-free tourist resorts. Policies directed at achieving a modal switch for staying visitors in a destination area, encouraging them to reduce or even forego the use of their car during their stay, will bring benefits. This will be in the form of reduced congestion, air pollution, noise, and visual intrusion, as well as reducing the demand for car parking at a visitor attraction. However, as the case studies already have demonstrated, they will have an impact on GHG emissions. Furthermore, by targeting a minority of trips, for example, the longer distance stay visits, small reductions in the number of visitor arrivals by car will produce disproportionately large reductions in GHG emissions. Savings are not directly related to the volume of the modal switch. And lastly, can environmental objectives be met without a change in modal share by car? This is dependent on the targets for the transport policy, which it has been established have not been set. Nevertheless, if reduced GHG emissions are the principal aim, then visitor spend, visitor nights, and visit to visitor attractions can all see growth without an associated growth in GHG emissions. If visitors travel less often but stay longer, a decrease in the share of day visits combined with an increase in the average length of stay can reduce the GHG emissions with no reduction in the share of arrivals by car. Needless to say, current tourism trends are moving in the opposite direction with the increase in short break holidays as well as long distance day visits, and this will need to change. In conclusion, creating such innovations that focus on establishing a more sustainable way of traveling and minimizing our carbon footprints will produce nothing but great advantages for environmental healing and a more systematic and accessible way of information access.
Hi, this is Liza again, and now we are down to the visitor attraction initiatives. So there are three main approaches on how we can divert visitor traffic. So on to the first is through the combined tickets, second is through special bus services, and third is the parking restrictions. So for the first approach, we will talk about the combined tickets. So what are these combined tickets? So this can be a combination of either transport fee or admission fee. So that's the combination of those two. So who uses this combined tickets? The most prevalent mode of accommodation that uses this are the theme parks. So they use loyalty cards, discounts, special deals, and their different marketing strategies to reduce visitor entry. A number of combined tickets and transport schemes have been tried before, but the results have always been proved disappointing because with such multiplicity of offers, those arriving by private vehicles can often gain a cheaper access than those by arriving by public transport. And so the offer would just seem another promotion, thereby losing the environmental message. On to the next approach is the special bus services. So this concept is not new in the tourism industry anymore, as transportation field offer this, let it be the private organizations or public organizations to offer special bus services. So special bus services, they operate to offer an easier transport access to those non-car owners. So the concept has been further developed in same access areas to link together with the visitor attractions themselves or the local authorities. One example is the New Forest Tour launched in 2004. It runs a 2-hour circular route at hourly frequencies in the New Forest National Park. So during only at the peak of summer season. And another is the Conservation Express, which is also launched in 2004. The support for the Conservation Express had the principal aim of increasing visitor numbers by making the attraction accessible to non-car owners rather than switch visitors from cars. And although this meets the policy objective, it becomes a promotional tool rather than environmental policy. It's no wonder that the creation of the tourist services adds extra potential to value to the transport journey of a tourist and a visitor. It's thereby creating a seamless experience for them. However, specialized tourist services have been relatively short-lived, as it takes several seasons for a service to become well used to achieve its potential. On to the third approach, the parking at the visitor attractions. So the use of parking policies and restrictions have already been discussed before, but I just want to highlight that the importance of these policies and restrictions provide an easier mode of access, so there wouldn't be unwanted conflicts in the use of vehicles within this parking space. So parking spaces are essential to provide order and ease of movement. And failure to know these rules and regulation is not an excuse for violation. So that's it for the visitor attraction initiatives, the combined tickets, the bus services, and the parking restrictions.
For the next one is all about the integrated policies for attraction, in which there is an evidence that at least some car users can be persuaded to transfer to public transport services. Analysis of an integrated multimodal ticket used for leisure day trips into the Peak District National Park identifies modal switch as being around 42% of users who had a car available for the trip, although the potential does not appear to be the uniform across all age groups, appealing disproportionately to older age groups. So how does one begin to develop this potential? According to Dickinson, concluded that the carrot of improved public transport will not achieve a significant modal shift on its own. It must be accompanied by measures of car restraint such as restricted or expensive car parks.
In conclusion, there is a tremendous paucity of literature on travel to and from visitor attractions. And yet, as this chapter has shown, it represents by far the biggest environmental contribution made by the attractions. Indeed, the target of achieving the largest possible modal switch will not automatically produce the most desirable results. There is a limit to what attractions can achieve. For example, acting in isolation by developing their own green plans. And the wise strategies that tomorrow's tourism advocates need to be formulated into a coherent, integrated strategy combining tourism and transport policies on a regional and national level. And that is all for Chapter 7, Transport the Visitor Attractions.